Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Healthcare Leadership Live. My name is Mike Lyons, and I am the Chief Consultant with Seasoned Advice HR Services. And this podcast is for healthcare leaders who are looking to strengthen their clinics, strengthen their leadership, and really help their people and their clinics achieve a greater level of success. Today's show is going to be with just me, and I'm going to be talking about performance reviews. Why am I talking performance reviews? Because it's performance review season. It is October, and now's the time that we need to be generally completing those reviews. If you're still doing annual reviews, which most of you probably are, and we want to make sure we achieve these reviews with success. And I have some thoughts after 20 years of HR experience about what works well in performance reviews and what doesn't work as well. And you know what? Opinions on performance reviews are a dime a dozen. You can go out and read a million articles about it. But I will tell you that I have seen some certain things work better than others. And after leading HR in a healthcare practice that was extremely successful, that had outstanding retention, where employees were growing and the practice was thriving, I think what I have to say will be useful. So I hope that you'll find it useful. And my main message here for you is that I would like you to consider performance reviews to be less about the past and more about the future. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that here. Now, do I mean we don't look at the past at all? No, we're definitely going to look at the past. We're going to talk about the past year or the past period of performance. That's important to do. And that it can include you as the manager doing a look back and asking the employee also to do a self-evaluation. That's important too. Let's look at the past, but we want to look more so at the future, because you know what? Guess what? The past is done. The past is over. And this applies to your mindset also, by the way. Reveling in the past and dwelling on the past, it ain't going to get you where you want to go. It's important to do, but we only look at the past so that we can look at the future, so that we can change the future. And so I would say 75% of your performance review, quote unquote, is really a performance preview of the future. Okay, so what do we do in a performance preview? Well, we want to describe what the goals are for the coming period, the coming year. What are the goals? What do we want to continue doing? What do we want to start doing differently? Are there projects we want to focus on? Are there improvement ideas that we want to prioritize? Are there things we need to stop doing in the future? Things we did in the past that we want to stop doing? Sure. Are there things we want to do differently, right? So start, stop, and things that we want to continue doing. So those are three important things to cover in your performance preview. And you want to spend a lot of time describing what that is going to look like. What is the future going to look like? What's important? Because the employee wants to know and needs to know, how should they be spending their time moving forward? And where should they be putting their focus? And even if they were not the best performer in some areas, this is a time to describe what you want it to look like moving forward. You know, psychology research is going to show that the more you focus on the future, the more you focus on what you want and talk about what you want, the more better your results are going to be. If you spend 90% of your time talking about what you don't want and what was wrong and what was negative and don't do this, well, you know, the more, whatever you talk about more is what you're going to continue to get. And so talking about what you don't want is not nearly as helpful as talking about what you do want to see. And so that's why it's important to focus on the future. You know, I have a couple specific pieces of advice here on performance reviews as well. And one is about performance ratings. A rating is really looking back. We're going to look back and give you a score. And I'm really not a huge fan of giving the employee a rating. I think a score or a rating can be helpful internally, like for HR and the leadership team, to help put a little bit of structure around compensation and assessing employee performance. But to be honest, I think you can really do without it for the employee, because to have an employee assigned a number is just, there's no way to encapsulate someone's performance in a single number. You're a 3, you're a 4.26. What does that even mean, right? And so if you want to assign a rating to specific elements of the review, I think that's okay. Maybe attendance, maybe, patient interaction, or accuracy, some things like that might be helpful. But an overall rating, I'm not really a huge fan of. Because I just think human behavior is too complex for that. And so I would personally discourage you, especially sharing it with the employee, because the employee is just going to focus on it. And one risky thing about a rating is that if you overinflate that rating, and let's say this is an employee that's kind of mid, they're kind of meh, and a lot of times we overinflate those ratings, well, that overinflated rating is going to come back to hurt us. So that's one real consequence of using ratings, is now you've stamped it in gold. You're a 4, and it's in writing. And now if you 3 months later decide, this person is really no good, we need to get rid of them, well, now they have this 4 performance review from pretty recent. It's going to make it much harder for you to prevail in any kind of claim that the employee might make about discrimination or wrongful termination. And so putting some kind of overall rating, I'm just not a super fan of. It can be very risky in terms of creating adverse documentation. Another thing I'm really not a fan of is having a performance review that's very formula based. And so section 1 is weighted 20%, section 2 is weighted 37.6%, and you can get 3 points if you tack on this little thing, and you can subtract 6 points if you don't do this. Human performance is far too complex to try to, assign some kind of quantum theory of performance formula to it. Just don't attempt it. It's not going to be useful. Because in the end, that formula is just going to not satisfy you. There's going to be a case where you're like, oh man, the numbers don't really add up to what I think it should be. And that's because humans are just complicated. Humans are complicated. Now, I think I know what you're probably thinking, or some of you may be thinking, Mike, you don't want a rating, you don't want a formula. That sounds very risky. It sounds like you're introducing a lot of variation and risk, in the process. And something, some people could argue that. And that is one possible, allegation that could be levied here. But what I want to say is that I think that review with the numbers and the formulas creates more risk ultimately than not having a formula or a rating. And the reason is because, as I said, the rating, they tend to be overinflated. They put a hard number in stone that then is now created for the legal record for all time. And I'd much rather you sit down with an employee and say, you know what, your attendance has been pretty good, but I'd really like you to work on, your accuracy and your scribing. And all this is in the review. There's a narrative portion where you have text describing, what the employee did well, what they didn't do well, but you're not putting a rating necessarily on each thing, or certainly not an overall rating. And so you're giving more rich, granular feedback that's actually useful, and it's more descriptive. And then when it comes time for maybe disciplinary action down the road, or a pay type of decision, it allows you some interpretation, allows you some room for interpretation. And guess what? Pay and hiring and discipline, it's all gray. And when we try to engineer the gray out of employment decisions, that's when we actually create more risk, in my opinion, when we try to over-engineer the gray areas out. And this goes into attendance point programs and things like that, which I'm not a fan of. And so this is kind of aligns with my larger philosophy of humans are gray. And we need to have some thoughtful process, but we should not try to over-engineer a structure to eliminate gray, because there's just going to be some gray there. This show is sponsored by Seasoned Advice HR Services, where I help clinical healthcare businesses to make more money and save more money by hiring better, retaining better, and reducing your HR risk. If you would like an HR assessment or ongoing HR support, please reach out to me at seasoned-advice.com. Okay, so we don't want to have a formula. And then when it comes to pay, I do not love formulaic merit adjustments either. And why don't I like that? Because again, humans are gray, and what Joni needs to have for a raise is going to be very different from what Sally needs for a raise. And I think that there's room for flexibility in there. I think there's a lot of room for flexibility in there, because Joni and Sally, they're starting at different pay rates. Their performance is different. Their potential is different. The things that they're good at is different. No two employees are identical. And it's really not possible to engineer a compensation structure that eliminates risk. Okay. And so what is important is train your managers, educate them on how to make these decisions, and justifications are good. I'm a fan of justifications. Why is Joni getting a raise that is over the the budget, for example? Let's put a narrative around that. Let's put a structure around that. Let's have some description, is what I mean to say, around why we're making certain decisions. So now we're documenting our rationale for certain things. If someone gets a very low raise or no raise at all, let's put a description about why. Well, Jim already is paid really well, and he's really struggling in some areas, and I just didn't feel like it was a good idea to give him a raise this year. And so let's document that. We'll put that in writing, instead of just having a rating and a formula and a number. And a lot of times managers and clinics, they want to over-engineer their handbook or their pay practice or whatever, because then they think it kind of absolves them from having to explain or defend. And yeah, I guess it kind of does, but really what it really does is it makes the handbook now a proxy. And you say, well, the handbook says that this is what I'm supposed to do, and the formula says this is how I'm supposed to give you a raise right now. But that, let me tell you something, that is the suckiest, worst definition and explanation that you can give to an employee, is to point to a handbook or a formula. No one wants that. Nobody wants that. And so now you have abdicated your responsibility and your thinking ability to a formula and a handbook. Not that the handbooks aren't important. Handbooks are important. There is a place for handbooks, absolutely, but not a 100-page handbook that tries to define every sort of potentiality and outcome, okay? And that's a lot of times what managers want, that makes them feel comfortable, like a comfortable, warm blanket. I have this handbook and this policy I can point to. But as leaders, we're going to have to live in the gray. I guess if there's a second theme on this podcast, it's about, and I'm going to talk about this all the time, a lot, is living in the gray. The gray is where you have to live in leadership. And so that means defending decisions and making hard decisions and not relying on firm policies. That's going to upset employees more when you say, well, this is the formula. This is why you're getting a 2% raise. Well, that's not very comfortable, and that's why people end up quitting and leaving, is because, and then what you end up having to do a lot of times is have to get an exception. Oh, hey, CEO, can I get an exception here for Sally? She's really good, and the formula says this, and she complained, and I just didn't know what to do, so can I give her 5% instead of 2%? And I'm all for thinking outside of the box and doing what needs to be done. But let's just do that from the get-go. Let's do it from the get-go rather than putting employees into certain boxes and then having to create exceptions later. Exceptions create risk also. Exceptions create risk. And so, that's my philosophy on that. If you have a different opinion, I'd love to hear. Comment on this cast and this show what your thoughts are. If you've ever seen a lawsuit, if you've ever been party to a lawsuit in your business because of some of the things related to compensation, I'd love to hear about it. But to be perfectly honest, a lot of the times what I see lawsuits coming from a lack of structure or managers, freewheeling decisions, it's not because of a lack of structure. It's because of systemic animus that manager had towards a certain group of employees and comments that were made and other certain behaviors. And really poor decision making in the moment, and not necessarily a lack of structure. And so I'm really against over structuring. Again, I've said that enough at this point. And so I'd love to hear your feedback on this. Again, we're talking about performance reviews here, and so we want to look into the future. As I said, what are the goals for the clinic? What are the goals for the business? Where are we going? Is there a new camera? Is there a new tool that we need to learn? Is there a billing process that needs to be improved? Do we want to challenge this employee with a project that they can take on? Is there some way I want to give them a new skill set by challenging them in some way? And so in this performance preview, we can outline projects, tasks, goals, metrics that we want them to hit. We want to have a good discussion about what is the future going to look like and give a preview, co-create a vision of the future that the employees bought into by getting their input about how to do things and how we want to interact and how we want to create a successful future for our clinic. That's really important. I want to talk about, a lot of times in performance reviews, they are of an annual schedule. And what this ends up lending or creating is it creates a situation where you're sitting down with an employee, and for the first time in a year, they're hearing some negative feedback for the first time. And we don't want to do that in the performance review. If it's an annual performance review, for sure, we don't want them to have to wait that long. And so backward-looking conversations about critical things need to be happening ongoing. And so the annual performance review is a future-looking thing. Backward-looking things, address it in the moment. Hey, can we sit down? We need to chat about something. We're going to have a conversation, and maybe we escalate it at some point. But if there's an issue, a problem, that needs to be addressed in the moment and very clearly and without hesitation. Also, without a lot of emotional load. We don't want to make it a serious, scary thing necessarily all the time. It can be very light. It can be very matter of fact. Hey, you know what? We need to work on your accuracy with charting. Here's how we can do that. But don't delay, because we don't want to get to the performance review and have any surprises there. Any negative stuff in the performance review should have been talked about already. Now, on the flip side, we want to make sure we share gratitude and appreciation all throughout the year too. Don't wait on that either. Keep that flowing and do it a lot more than the constructive feedback, because again, the more you talk about what you want, the more you're going to get that. So make ongoing feedback really important. And the annual conversation can be really more about growth and the future and where we're headed, and kind of more of a big picture discussion and less of a stressful thing, because it's so stressful when you don't know where you stand and you know you're going to have this one conversation where everything is going to come out and everything's going to get aired out. Man, that is so stressful. Who wants to do that? I don't want to do that. Do it in the moment. Do it in the moment. I think that really captures everything I want to say here on performance reviews today. Do them, definitely do them, definitely give feedback. I think it's so important to give employees feedback on an ongoing basis and to guide them and to show gratitude. And it's really, to be honest, that ongoing feedback that is the most important. And the annual documentation is really kind of more of a formality, and it just kind of does help commemorate, the year. And it helps you kind of remember, because maybe a year or two later, you do kind of need to look back and say, gosh, what was that issue with Sally that, why was I concerned? And so it helps to remind you of what some of the issues are. So yeah, document, kind of like a little journal, right, for the employee and for you, about what happened and what your goals that you set for them also. So you can look back and say, hey, remember we set this goal and we're crushing it. So, keep up the good work. And you know what? One last point I want to say is that there are people who talk about the annual performance review and then usually the subsequent pay adjustment as a reward. That's your reward. This is our rewards and recognition process. I had a CEO once he continually kept calling it our rewards and recognition. Well, that's a sucky reward. To have to wait a whole year to get some kind of reward. To me, the pay adjustment at the end of the year is an important thing, a very important thing, and I am a fan of doing it once a year, but it's not a reward exactly. It is an acknowledgement of someone's value, and it is strategically done, a strategically made decision to help you retain that person for the next year. And it's not a reward, because if it was just a reward, then if someone performed really well, but they were already way overpaid, then you would give them a big old fat reward for their great performance, and they would just continue to be more overpaid than before. And so, to me, there is a reward element that needs to happen, but that can happen throughout the year. You can give spot bonuses, you can give verbal praise and appreciation, and you can adjust their pay to keep up with, inflation and stuff if that's within your budget. But rewarding them on a one-to-one basis with their level of performance is not really a smart use of your budget. And some people may be upset because they're used to getting huge pay raises year after year after year because they're a 5 out of 5. I'm so awesome. But that's a recipe for someone just having out of control pay rates, and your CFO is not going to like that. And so strategically thinking about compensation is something you have to do in these annual performance reviews as well. And my recommendation for you is to think of it less as a reward and more of a retention tool. And I know employees can think of it like a reward, but I think it's important for us to try to change that outlook and to focus more on making sure that they are paid correctly within the structure of your organization for the work that they do. And it could be awesome contribution. We don't want to minimize that, but as a reward, giving a one pay increase at the end of the year, if you studied psychology research, you know that you need to get rewards and reinforcement kind of close after you do the behavior that the reward is for, or else it doesn't really work. So it's not really so much a reward, it's a retention tool. Let's call it what it is. So those are my thoughts on performance reviews. It's important to do. It's important to think about. Don't make the mistakes that I talked about in this show. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. If you like this show, if you like the guests that I've been having, I would love if you would follow, share this episode with someone that who's doing performance reviews. Maybe they could use a tip or two. Someone in the healthcare space that is working on performance reviews. Share this cast with them, and check out my website at seasoned-advice.com if you want to see more. Check out the blog. I have so many blog posts that should be useful to you as you lead your clinics. As always, I appreciate you listening. This show is for healthcare leaders who want to level up their clinics and level up their leadership and retain better, hire better, reduce their HR risk. So I hope that you have gotten those goals met today. Thanks for listening. Now go out there and lead with confidence.